You will not believe what happens to the girl at the end. Make sure to like and subscribe so we can continue writing stories like this one. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.
Arrival in Redemption. The stagecoach lurched to a halt, spitting dust that swirled around Eliza's worn boots as she stepped onto the cracked earth of redemption. The Kansas sun beat down, relentless and unforgiving, mirroring the scrutiny in the eyes that fixed upon her. A small knot of townsfolk had gathered, their faces a mixture of boredom and blatant curiosity. They were waiting for mail, perhaps, or news. Or maybe, she thought with a sinking feeling, just something to talk about. Eliza adjusted the strap of her carpetbag, the weight of her meager belongings a familiar comfort against her hip. She'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her head, each scenario ending with a gracious smile and a polite greeting. But the reality was different. Her throat felt tight, her tongue thick. A little girl, no older than 7, pointed a finger at Eliza's face. "Mama, what happened to her cheek?" The mother, a woman with tightly permed hair and a disapproving frown, yanked the child back. "Hush, Sarah. It's not polite to stare." But her eyes lingered, and Eliza knew the damage was done. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Eliza tried to ignore them, focusing on the task at hand. She needed to find Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. She scanned the faces, searching for a flicker of recognition, a sign of welcome. Then she saw her. Martha Grimshaw, the self-proclaimed Queen Bee of Redemption, stood with a group of women, her head tilted at a conspiratorial angle. Eliza recognized her from a photograph the Reverend had sent. Martha was a stout woman with a perpetual air of disapproval. She clutched a beaded reticule in one hand, her knuckles white. Eliza overheard snippets of the conversation, carried on the dry Kansas wind. "Horrible scar. Imagine what happened. Poor Mr. Abernathy." Martha's voice, sharp and laced with disdain, cut through the murmur. "Well, I certainly wouldn't want that face greeting me every morning. Some women are just desperate, I suppose." The other women tittered, their eyes flicking between Eliza and Martha. Eliza felt a blush creep up her neck. She lowered her gaze, focusing on the dust devils dancing in the street. She'd known this wouldn't be easy, but the open hostility stung more than she'd anticipated. A young man, barely more than a boy, detached himself from the crowd. He wore a faded denim shirt and a shy smile. He tipped his hat. "Ma'am, are you Miss Meadowsweet?" Eliza nodded, relief washing over her. "Yes, I am. I'm Thomas, Mrs. Henderson's nephew. I can take you to the boarding house." He gestured toward a rickety wagon parked nearby. Eliza followed him, grateful for the distraction. As they walked, she noticed a group of Native Americans observing them from across the street. They were Lakota, their faces stoic and unreadable. A wave of longing washed over her. She hadn't heard their language spoken in so long. Without thinking, she raised her hand in a gesture of greeting and called out, "Haukola." "Hello, friend." The Lakota men paused, their eyes widening in surprise. One of them responded in kind, his voice low and melodic. Eliza replied, a brief exchange in their shared tongue. The effect on the townsfolk was immediate. The whispers ceased, replaced by stunned silence. Martha Grimshaw's mouth hung open. Thomas stared at Eliza, his eyes wide with disbelief. You speak Lakota?" Eliza blushed again, realizing her impulsive act. "Yes," she said quietly. I learned it a long time ago." The wagon ride to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house was short and mostly silent. Thomas seemed lost in thought, and Eliza was content to watch the landscape blur by. The boarding house was a small, 2-story building with peeling paint and a crooked porch. Mrs. Henderson, a plump woman with a kind face, greeted Eliza warmly. "Welcome to Redemption, dear," she said, her voice raspy. "I'm so glad you made it safe and sound." Eliza's room was small and sparsely furnished, containing just a bed, a washstand, and a small, scarred table. The window looked out onto a dusty alley. But it was private, and for now it was enough. She closed the door and leaned against it, the silence amplifying the loneliness that threatened to engulf her. She reached up and touched the scar on her cheek, the familiar ridge of tissue a constant reminder of her past. Redemption. The name felt ironic. 7 rejections. Mr. Abernathy, the first hopeful, chimed the hour of 3 precisely. Eliza, perched anxiously on the settee's edge, felt the lilac silk, chosen by her mother to highlight her eyes, now a stifling constraint. A garment of concealment would have suited her far better. Abernathy, a stout figure crowned with a walrus mustache, possessed eyes that flitted, inventorying the room's contents with unsettling precision. His bow was rigid, his handshake a fleeting capture. Conversational gambits about the weather and Mama's confections quickly exhausted themselves. Then came the inevitable question about her journey westward. Eliza, momentarily caught off guard, gestured a tad too emphatically, turning her face towards the sunlit window. A flicker, surprise morphing into something akin to revulsion, crossed his features. He cleared his throat, the sound crisp and abrupt. "Miss Meadowsweet," he announced, his tone suddenly formal, "I find I've misplaced my spectacles. Most regrettable. Must return to the hotel. Another time, perhaps?" He vanished before she could answer, leaving behind only the ghost of bay rum and a heavier cloud of disappointment. Silas, the second prospect, a farmer all sinew and weathered skin, never even breached the parlor threshold. Spotting her on the porch, his smile wavered, then dissolved entirely into a mumbled excuse about a calving cow before he pivoted on his heel and fled. Rejection number 3 arrived in the guise of a shopkeeper whose nervous fidgeting stretched into an agonizing hour before he blurted, "My mother." She wouldn't countenance it. The fourth came bearing the weight of widowerhood and an appraising stare. He scrutinized her as one might a mare at auction, his gaze lingering on the scar. "Hardship won't frighten you, will it?" he growled. Eliza, seizing a sliver of hope, spoke of her life back east, her willingness to labor, her eagerness to learn. A grunt was his only acknowledgement before he declared, "I need a strong woman, a complete one." The fifth, a spectacled scholar, initially offered promise. A spirited debate about verse unfolded, his eyes alight with intellect. Yet, when he reached to brush a stray lock from her brow, his hand flinched back as if burned as it neared the blemish. A mumbled apology, and he was gone. The sixth, a traveling salesman with hair plastered back like a raven's wing and a manner just as smooth, proved the most egregious. His gaze lingered on the scar with unveiled curiosity, tracing its path with insolent eyes. "Intriguing," he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "Adds a certain something, I suppose. Doubt it'll help you peddle bonnets, though." Eliza bit back a scathing retort, her cheeks aflame with shame. The seventh rejection spoke volumes in silence. The man, a taciturn carpenter, took one look, shook his head with an expression of pity, then simply turned and walked away. That evening, the lilac dress lay abandoned on the floor as Eliza sought refuge in her chamber. Moonlight painted elongated shadows across the walls, shrinking the already cramped space, amplifying her isolation. She sank onto the bed's edge, the patchwork quilt rough against her skin, and surrendered to tears. Each dismissal had eroded a piece of her spirit, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Was she truly so abhorrent? Was she doomed to solitude, permanently branded by this disfigurement? The whispers she fought to ignore, the snickers, the stares, resonated in her thoughts, magnified by despair. She peered into the flawed mirror on the wall. The scar, a jagged brand etched across her cheek, seemed to throb, a persistent testament to her perceived flaw. A choked sob escaped her. "Who could ever desire me?" she whispered into the enveloping darkness. Whispers and solace. The mercantile air hung thick with the scent of dried apples and disapproval. Eliza kept her head down, pretending to examine a bolt of calico, but the whispers followed her like gnats. "Did you see her cheek?" Martha Grimshaw's voice, sharp as a shard of glass, cut through the pretense of hushed tones. "Like a brand," giggled Prudence, Martha's ever-present shadow. "No wonder she's been rejected so many times. Who would want that?" Eliza's fingers tightened on the fabric. She knew she should leave, retreat to the relative safety of her small room above the livery, but a perverse need to prove them wrong, to show them she was more than just a scar, kept her rooted to the spot. "And did you hear?" Martha continued, her voice dripping with venomous amusement. "She actually thinks she can teach school. Imagine trying to learn your letters from that." Eliza could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, a blush that had nothing to do with the summer sun. She finally found the strength to turn, clutching the calico like a shield. Martha and her cronies were arranged like vultures on a fence post, their eyes gleaming with malicious glee. Eliza swallowed, trying to summon the courage to say something, anything, but the words caught in her throat. She remembered another time, another place, where her appearance hadn't mattered, where she had been judged not by her face, but by her spirit. It had been 3 years ago, a lifetime away. The traveling Lakota tribe, their faces weathered and wise, had stopped near her family's farm for several weeks. Eliza, drawn to their quiet dignity and the haunting melodies of their language, had spent every spare moment with them. They had shared their stories, their traditions, and their language, teaching her the intricate sounds and rhythms of Lakota. They hadn't flinched at her scar, hadn't whispered or stared. They had seen her, the Eliza that Martha Grimshaw and the rest of Redemption refused to acknowledge. She remembered the gentle touch of Grandmother Willow, the tribe elder, on her hand as she taught her the word for strength. "Shank waist," Grandmother Willow had said, her voice a low rumble. "Good heart." Eliza had stammered through the phrase, self-conscious about her accent, but Grandmother Willow had only smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Practice, little sister. The language is a gift. Use it." Eliza finally managed a curt nod to Martha and turned away, the calico still clutched in her hand. She paid for the fabric, ignoring the snickers that followed her out the door, and hurried back to her room. The small space, usually stifling in the summer heat, felt like a sanctuary. She closed the door, shutting out the whispers and the judgmental eyes. She threw the calico onto the bed and sat down on the floor, closing her eyes. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak, her voice a low murmur at first, then growing stronger with each word. "Thathanka iu hankpi swankowakane king lena oye king lila thika." The buffalo are all horses to these people, and they are very young. The words, imperfectly pronounced but filled with longing, filled the room. She repeated the phrase, savoring the feel of the Lakota syllables on her tongue. She spoke of the stars, of the wind, of the connection to the land that the Lakota had shared with her. With each phrase, the knot in her stomach loosened. The sting of Martha Grimshaw's words faded. The scar on her cheek still burned, a physical reminder of her difference. But the Lakota words were a balm, a reminder of her worth, of the strength that resided within. She continued to practice, her voice rising and falling in the ancient cadence, finding solace in the whispers of a language that understood her, a language that saw beyond the surface. A kindred spirit. The bell above the door of Bellwether's general store jingled, a sound Silas knew intimately. He glanced up from arranging bolts of calico, his fingers still nimble despite the tremor that had begun to creep into his left hand. It wasn't Eliza Meadowsweet, just Mrs. Abernathy, wanting more lye soap. But Eliza had been in his thoughts all morning. He'd seen her walking past his window, head down, the brim of her bonnet casting her face in shadow. He'd wanted to call out, to offer her a cup of his weak, lukewarm coffee, but the words had caught in his throat, tangled with a shyness he hadn't managed to shake in all his 30 years. He watched now, idly straightening a stack of tin peaches, his gaze drifting back to the street. Dust devils danced in the afternoon sun, and a mangy dog, ribs showing, limped past. Silas frowned. The animal looked injured, its left foreleg held at an unnatural angle. Then he saw her. Eliza. She stopped a few feet from the dog, her hand outstretched. Silas could almost feel the tremor in her own hand, the hesitation before she spoke. He couldn't hear her words through the glass, but he saw the gentle way she crouched, the soft curve of her back. The dog, initially wary, edged closer, sniffing her hand cautiously. Eliza remained still, patient as a saint. Then she began to stroke its head, her touch featherlight. The dog whined softly, a pitiful sound that tugged at Silas's heart. Eliza examined the injured leg. Silas saw her wince, a fleeting grimace that spoke volumes. She ripped a strip from the hem of her own skirt, a sacrifice in a town where fabric was precious, and began to fashion a makeshift bandage. Her movements were surprisingly deft, her fingers sure. He watched, mesmerized, as she finished binding the dog's leg. She spoke to it again, a low murmur that seemed to soothe the animal. The dog licked her hand. Silas felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just pity for the dog, although that was certainly there. It was something more, a deep respect for Eliza's quiet compassion. The way she hadn't hesitated to help, the way she'd offered kindness without expecting anything in return. He'd seen plenty of folks in town kick at stray dogs, shoo them away like unwanted pests. But Eliza, she was different. When she finally rose, dusting off her hands, the dog stayed close, limping alongside her as she continued down the street. Silas noticed she walked slower now, matching her pace to the dog's. He knew he couldn't just stand here, watching. He had to do something. He scurried to the back of the store, grabbing a handful of dried beef strips and a small, dented tin of condensed milk. He hurried back to the front counter, placing the items in a paper bag. A few minutes later, Eliza entered the store. Her cheeks were flushed and there was a smudge of dirt on her forehead. The dog, its makeshift bandage already looking worse for wear, lay just outside the doorway, panting softly. "Good afternoon, Mr. Bellwether," she said, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. "Afternoon, Miss Meadowsweet," Silas replied, his own voice sounding rough in his ears. He cleared his throat. Looking for anything in particular? Just some bandages if you have any. And perhaps some liniment. Silas nodded, already reaching for the supplies. He gathered everything she needed, then added the bag he'd prepared earlier. These are? Eliza asked, her eyebrows raised. For the dog, Silas said, avoiding her gaze. On the house? Well, almost. I'll give you a discount on the bandages and liniment, seeing as you're helping a creature in need. He fumbled with the words, wishing he could articulate what he truly felt. Eliza looked at him, her eyes a deeper shade of blue than he remembered. He saw a flicker of something there, gratitude, perhaps, or maybe even understanding. Thank you, Mr. Bellwether, she said softly. That's very kind of you. He just nodded, unable to meet her gaze for more than a moment. He knew he was blushing, felt the heat rising in his cheeks. He rang up her purchases, deliberately avoiding looking at the scar on her face. He didn't see it as a blemish anymore. He saw it as part of her, a mark that somehow only highlighted the beauty of her spirit. The Lakota arrived. Dust devils danced in the wake of their approach, miniature cyclones mirroring the rising unease in redemption. They rode not as warriors, but as traders, their horses laden with furs, hand-woven blankets, and intricately beaded leather goods. Their faces, painted with ochre and black, were stoic, their eyes scanning the town with a quiet intensity. A hush fell over redemption. The clatter of the blacksmith's hammer ceased. The raucous laughter from the saloon died in throats thick with apprehension. Children, playing in the dirt, scrambled behind their mothers' skirts. Fear, a palpable thing, hung heavy in the dry air. Eliza Meadowsweet, who had been meticulously stacking cans of peaches on the porch of the general store, straightened her back. Her calloused hands, usually stained with the juice of berries or the dye from medicinal herbs, smoothed the worn fabric of her calico dress. She descended the steps, her movements deliberate, her gaze unwavering. _Haukola. Toke Yonhi, her voice, clear and strong, cut through the oppressive silence. The Lakota words, spoken with a practiced fluency, rolled off her tongue like water over smooth stones. Every head in redemption swiveled. Jaws dropped. Whispers, sharp and disbelieving, rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Abernathy clutched her rosary beads with renewed fervor. Mr. Henderson, the saloon owner, choked on his cigar. Even Jebediah, the town simpleton, stopped drooling and stared. The lead rider, a man whose face was etched with the wisdom of the plains, dismounted. He was tall even for a Lakota, his shoulders broad and powerful. His long, black hair, streaked with silver, was adorned with a single eagle feather. Chayton Wombly, they called him, Hawk. His dark eyes, unwavering, metalizes. _how hanhipi kinla io hyangni. Wawapi king lila wastes My Chayton Wombly, Lakota oye wakasa. His voice, deep and resonant, resonated with a quiet authority. Greetings, white woman. Your words are unexpected. I am Chayton Wombly, a man of the Lakota people. Eliza inclined her head slightly. _Midikui obi wakazo. Eliza emisiapi. Shank wastia kilo. I recognize you as relatives. I am called Eliza. My heart is good. She gestured towards the store. We have much to trade. Flour, sugar, coffee, cloth. Chayton Wombly's gaze swept over the gawking townsfolk. He saw the fear, the suspicion, the thinly veiled hostility. His expression remained impassive, unreadable. He turned back to Eliza. _ni io hilahi are you alone here? Not entirely, Eliza replied, her eyes flicking to the shadowy interior of the store. But mostly. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the nervous shuffling of feet and the whinny of a horse. Chayton Wombly dismounted fully, offering his hand in a gesture of peace. Eliza met his gaze, then his hand, her grip firm. Then let us trade, Eliza. Let us see if we can find common ground where others see only differences. He glanced again at the townsfolk, his dark eyes holding a hint of warning. For the wind carries whispers, and whispers can become storms. He released her hand and spoke to his people in Lakota. Immediately, they began unloading their goods, the rhythmic thud of bundles hitting the ground a counterpoint to the stunned silence of redemption. The dust swirled around them, a tangible symbol of the shifting landscape, both literal and figurative, that Eliza Meadowsweet had unwittingly unleashed. A bridge between worlds. The silence following Eliza's Lakota greeting was thick enough to choke on. Head swiveled, mouths gaped. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, momentarily ceasing its rustle through the cottonwoods lining the creek. The Lakota traders, previously stoic and wary, visibly relaxed, their dark eyes widening with surprise and something akin to relief. One of them, a man with braids adorned with feathers and beads, responded in a torrent of rapid-fire Lakota. his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Eliza's chest. Eliza answered him with equal fluency, her own voice clear and strong, the unfamiliar syllables rolling off her tongue with practiced ease. Silas watched, mesmerized, from the doorway of his general store. He hadn't understood a word, but the cadence, the melody of the language was captivating. He'd heard snippets of Lakota spoken before, of course, but never like this. Never with such authority. The conversation continued for several minutes, a back and forth punctuated by gestures and the occasional nod. The tension in the air, palpable moments before, began to dissipate. The townsfolk, still gawking, edged closer, drawn in by the sheer spectacle of it all. Even Martha, usually so quick with a cutting remark, stood silent, her knitting needles frozen in her hands. Finally, Eliza turned to the crowd, a serene expression on her face. "They wish to trade blankets for flour and sugar," she announced, her voice regaining its familiar, gentle tone. "They also have dried buffalo meat and some handcrafted tools." A flurry of activity erupted. Silas, still reeling from the revelation of Eliza's linguistic prowess, found himself swept up in the ensuing bartering. He watched as Eliza mediated between the townsfolk and the traders, ensuring fair prices and smoothing over misunderstandings. Her presence was a calming force, a bridge between two worlds that had previously existed in a state of wary indifference. Later, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty street, Silas found Eliza sitting on the porch of his store, watching the Lakota traders pack up their goods. He approached her cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. "Miss Meadowsweet," he began, his voice barely a whisper. I don't understand. How did you learn to speak Lakota so fluently?" Eliza turned to him, a small smile gracing her lips. "It's a long story, Mr. Bellwether." He gestured to the empty rocking chair beside her. "I have time." She hesitated for a moment, then sighed softly. Before I came here, I lived further west, near the Black Hills. There were many settlers moving into the area and many Lakota who felt their land was being threatened. I grew up listening to both sides. I learned their language, their customs. I became a translator, a go-between, trying to prevent misunderstandings and bloodshed." Silas stared at her, his eyes wide with admiration. "You were a mediator?" "Sometimes," she said quietly. "Sometimes I failed. But I always tried." She looked away, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "It wasn't always easy. Neither side fully trusted me. The settlers thought I was too sympathetic to the Lakota, and the Lakota, well, they saw me as an outsider." Silas leaned forward, his voice filled with genuine concern. "And the scar?" He trailed off, suddenly realizing he was treading on delicate ground. Eliza touched the mark on her cheek, her expression hardening slightly. "That's a story for another day, Mr. Bellwether." He nodded, understanding her need for privacy. "But you helped them. Both sides." "I tried," she repeated. "I believed then, and I still believe now, that understanding is the key to peace. If people can just talk to each other, listen to each other, they can find common ground." Silas felt a surge of respect for this woman. This scarred, misunderstood woman who possessed such extraordinary skills and such profound compassion. He had initially seen her as a potential wife, a helpmate. Now he realized she was so much more. She was a force, a bridge between worlds. And he, Silas Bellwether, was suddenly determined to do everything he could to help her build that bridge in this town. "Thank you, Miss Meadowsweet," he said, his voice stronger now, filled with newfound purpose. "Thank you for everything." The truth of the scar. The air in the general store, usually a comforting blend of tanned leather and hearth smoke, felt stifling to Silas. That familiar scent, a balm on most days, now amplified his disquiet. Eliza stood near the store's rear, her voice a soft melody as she conversed with Chayton Wombley, a Lakota trader whose presence invariably sparked interest in Harmony Creek. Feigning interest in rearranging the coffee tins, Silas eavesdropped, a knot tightening in his gut. He'd overheard spiteful remarks about Eliza's scar, words that stung him. He'd also been struck by her effortless command of the Lakota language, a skill that puzzled him. Curiosity, usually a gentle nudge, roared within him now. He had to understand. As their transaction appeared to conclude, Silas spoke, his voice a touch too loud. "Mr. Wombley, a word, if you please?" Chayton faced him, his expression one of quiet contemplation. Dark eyes, like polished night stones, seemed to pierce Silas's clumsy attempt at nonchalance. Silas Bellwether. You seek information from me, I perceive. Silas swallowed, his palms slick. It concerns Miss Meadowsweet and her disfigurement. Chayton betrayed no reaction. A simple nod was his only acknowledgement, his long braids shifting slightly. The blemish she bears is no cause for shame, Silas Bellwether. It stands as a testament to bravery. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. You inquire as to its origin. Silas nodded, unable to hold the Lakota man's steady gaze. Chayton indicated a nearby crate, inviting Silas to take a seat. It happened 3 summers past. A wagon, laden beyond its capacity and improperly secured, broke free from its restraints on the ridge. It hurtled toward the creek, directly toward our children at play near the water's edge. Silas envisioned the scene: pandemonium, billowing dust, terrified cries. Eliza was present, haggling for beadwork. Instantly, she raced toward the runaway wagon. She succeeded in altering its course, diverting it into the muddy embankment moments before it reached the children. The force of the impact, however, hurled her against a boulder. A will grazed her face. Chayton's tone remained even, yet Silas detected a profound reverence, a deep-seated gratitude. She spared my sister's son, a boy named Tezin. He would not draw breath today were it not for her courage. Silas finally met Chayton's unwavering stare. He saw not censure, but understanding. Understanding of his probing, and perhaps a trace of something deeper. Just then, the other Lakota traders gathered closer, their faces reflecting admiration. A woman, her dress adorned with meticulous quillwork, stepped forward. She spoke in Lakota, her tone resonant with sincerity. Eliza, a blush rising on her cheeks, translated, she says they are forever in my debt. They consider me family. Another trader, a tall man with a nose like a raptor's beak, added, her tongue dances with our language like the wind through prairie grass. She is kindred in spirit. Silas gazed at Eliza, seeing her anew. The petty slurs, the cruel taunts, seemed to dissolve. This woman was no mere mail-order bride with a marred face. She was a figure of valor. She was one who had gambled everything to safeguard a child. His voice emerged, a hushed murmur. I didn't realize. Eliza smiled, a gentle, authentic smile that illuminated her face. There is much you don't know about me, Silas Bellwether. Her eyes met his for a fleeting moment, and a warmth surged through him, dispelling the chill of his ignorance. But I'm amenable to sharing if you are willing to listen. Changing perceptions. The air in the mercantile hummed with a nervous energy, a stark contrast to the hushed fear that had permeated it just days before. Now, instead of whispers of Scarface and unwanted, the talk revolved around Eliza's fluency in Lakota. Did you hear her speak? Mrs. Abernathy, the baker's wife, exclaimed. Her voice still tinged with disbelief. Like she was born to it. Said those traders were about to turn around after that business with young Timmy and the apples. But she calmed them right down. Saved us all a heap of trouble, she did. Others chimed in, recounting snippets of Eliza's interactions with the Lakota. They spoke of the respect evident in the traders' eyes, the way they listened intently to her words, the subtle nods of understanding that passed between them. It was a performance none of them had expected, an act of quiet heroism that redefined their perception of the woman they had so readily dismissed. Eliza herself seemed oblivious to the shift in sentiment. She spent her days tending the garden, the fragrant blooms a vibrant splash of color against the muted tones of the town. She'd occasionally visit the mercantile to assist Silas with translations, her presence drawing curious glances that no longer held the sting of malice. One afternoon, as Eliza weeded a patch of lavender, she heard a hesitant cough behind her. She turned to find Silas Bellwether standing awkwardly, a small bouquet of wildflowers clutched in his large hands. Miss Meadowsweet, he stammered, his face reddening. I picked these for you. They reminded me of your spirit. Strong and beautiful. Eliza accepted the flowers, their earthy scent filling her nostrils. Thank you, Mr. Bellwether. That's very kind. He shuffled his feet, avoiding her gaze. Silas. Please call me Silas. And I was wondering if you're not otherwise occupied, if you might consider taking a walk with me. Down by the creek. The fireflies are starting to come out. Eliza considered his offer. Silas was a good man, she knew. Quiet and unassuming, but with a gentle heart. I would like that very much, Silas. As they strolled along the creek bank that evening, the air alive with the twinkling lights of the fireflies, Silas surprised Eliza with his knowledge of the local flora and fauna. He spoke of the constellations, pointing out the different star formations in the inky sky. He was a different man outside of the mercantile, more relaxed, more confident. Eliza found herself enjoying his company, appreciating his quiet observations and genuine interest in her stories of the prairie. The next morning, Eliza was sweeping the porch when she saw Martha Grimshaw approaching, her face etched with an uncharacteristic expression of remorse. Eliza stiffened, her hand tightening on the broom handle. "Miss Meadowsweet," Martha began, her voice unusually subdued. I wanted to apologize for the way I treated you. It wasn't right. We were all wrong." Eliza regarded her coolly. "Apologies are easily given, Mrs. Grimshaw. Actions speak louder." Martha's shoulders slumped. "I know. I hope you can understand. We were scared. We didn't know you." "And now you do?" Eliza challenged, raising an eyebrow. Martha hesitated. "We're trying to. We see that you're stronger than we thought, and that you care about this town." Eliza leaned on the broom, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Care is earned, Mrs. Grimshaw, not given freely." Martha nodded slowly. "I understand. I just wanted you to know. We're trying to change our perceptions." She turned and walked away, her footsteps heavy on the dusty road. Eliza watched her go, a flicker of something akin to hope stirring within her. Perhaps, just perhaps, this town was capable of seeing beyond her scar, beyond the whispers and the prejudice. Perhaps, finally, she could find a place to belong. A future of peace. The air in the general store hung thick with suspicion. Outside, the sun beat down on redemption. But inside, a chill radiated from the stiff postures of the Lakota traders and the tight-lipped faces of the townsfolk. A deal over winter hides had stalled. Accusations of short measure and inflated prices flew, the undercurrent of distrust a palpable thing. Eliza stepped forward, her voice calm. "Chayton Wombly," she addressed the Lakota leader. "I believe Mr. Abernathy here is concerned about the quality of the pelts. He says some are thinner than agreed." Chayton Wombly, Hawk, nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering. He spoke in Lakota, his words measured, the rumble of his voice a low counterpoint to the high-pitched tension. Eliza translated. "Hawk says the early thaw made for thinner winter coats. He is willing to offer a discount on these pelts and guarantee the quality of the next shipment." Abernathy grumbled, but the offer was fair. He'd been trying to drive the price down. With Eliza smoothing the way, the haggling continued, but the venom had dissipated. She navigated the nuances of each language, interpreting not just words, but intentions, bridging the gap between two cultures that had long been at odds. By evening, the deal was struck, sealed with handshakes and a shared pipe. The air finally cleared. Silas waited for her outside the store, leaning against a wagon wheel. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and violet, reflecting in the dust-covered street. He watched her emerge, relief evident in his gentle features. "You have a gift, Eliza," he said softly, taking her hand. "You bring people together." Eliza smiled, feeling the warmth of his touch. "It's just words, Silas. But words can build bridges or burn them down." He squeezed her hand. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his voice a little rough around the edges. He was still learning to speak from the heart, but he was trying. "About who I am and who I want to be. And about you." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Eliza, I know this town, well, it hasn't always been welcoming. And I know about your scar. But none of that matters to me. What I see is a woman of strength, intelligence, and kindness. A woman who can speak to the best in people." He looked deeply into her eyes, his own filled with sincerity. "Will you marry me, Eliza? Will you be my wife?" A warmth bloomed in Eliza's chest, chasing away the lingering shadows of the past. She had almost given up on finding a place where she truly belonged. "Yes, Silas," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, I will." Their wedding was unlike anything Redemption had ever seen. Held in a meadow on the edge of town, it was a celebration of two worlds coming together. Silas, handsome in his best suit, stood beneath an archway woven with wildflowers. Eliza, radiant in a simple gown adorned with Lakota beadwork, walked towards him, her heart overflowing. Chayton Wombly performed the ceremony, speaking in both Lakota and English. He spoke of respect, understanding, and the promise of a shared future. The townsfolk, initially hesitant, found themselves drawn in by the spirit of the occasion. Lakota drums mingled with the strains of a fiddle, and the air was filled with laughter and song. After the vows, Eliza and Silas exchanged rings crafted from silver and turquoise, symbols of their commitment to each other and to the bridge they were building between cultures. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the meadow, Eliza knew that redemption, once a place of fear and prejudice, had the chance to become something more. A place where differences were celebrated and peace was not just a dream, but a future they could build together. The scar on her cheek no longer felt like a mark of shame, but a reminder of the journey that had led her to this moment, to this man, to this future of hope and unity.